Roland Garros and Wimbledon are both just around the corner as the European Grand Slams get underway with a bang. And there's so much to discuss, from Jannik Sinner's return from a doping ban to Novak Djokovic's in different form and a wide open field in women's tennis. Good thing we've got someone on this sporting planet who can guide us through it all. Mark Woodforde is a 12-time Grand Slam doubles champion, winning at all 4 tournaments, and has reached the 4th round at both Roland Garros and Wimbledon in the singles. Mark, good to see you. First of all, what have you been up to these days?
Hey, good, good. Thanks for having me, Todd. Yeah, look, I still have my hand in tennis. It's been, gosh, it's hard to imagine 20 plus years since I was playing professionally, but I remain involved. I commentate at the Grand Slams and working with the ITF. I sit on the board of directors and the chairman of Davis Cup, which we underwent some significant changes about 6, 7, 8 years ago, and so that keeps me busy.
Let's get right to it, and we'll start with Roland Garros, the clay court. You
Yeah.
played on it quite a bit. You know it well. What makes it so difficult or different for tennis players that spend a lot of their year, obviously, on hard surfaces?
Yeah, look, it's I certainly was one that played on, and I think as any tennis professional, I mean, it's part of your schedule. Roland Garros it comes at the back end of a approximately a 6, 7, 8 week lead up time, which is probably the a little unusual compared to the other slams, but it is a true test of I think it's few different areas. It tests your patience. It tests your physical level. It tests your mental capacity. That there are. It is probably the most difficult, in my opinion, of the Grand Slams to win because if you feel like you've at the end of those 2 weeks, you're holding that trophy. I think the joy of actually reflecting back because you have been tested in every area, and I think you have to have more of a complete game. You have to be able to play offensively, but the backbone of being, I think, a true clay courter is one that you have to put out a great defensive base, and but nonetheless, you've still got to be out there and try to get out and win some of the points. And if you look back at the past champions on both the men's and women's side, obviously with Nadal, he dominated for almost 15 years at Roland Garros, and that will remain unmatched. And I think a lot of us that think would probably clarify Rafa as a defensive player, but he also had that ability to finish points from the net. And at times it was a sneaky lefty serve that won him some key points. But it's the same on the women's side. You look back at Serena Williams or the last few years, Iga Swiatek. I mean, she plays offensively, but she also combines it with great defense.
You've had so much success across all the slams, but Roland Garros seemed to be the toughest one for you. What makes Roland Garros, that venue, obviously the surface, so challenging for players to come around to?
Oh, look, I actually was discussing this on the weekend. I was involved in a tennis camp here in the desert, and that specifically we were talking about Roland Garros, and it was a real challenge for not only for myself individually as a singles player, and of course, I go back to the beginning of my journey, and Australians. I think we're kind of a a group of players that probably were very athletic. We play very aggressive. We like to get to net. That's part of our DNA. But of course, as I mentioned on clay, you have to learn defense. You have to be patient. You actually have to choreograph and use the geography of the court a whole lot more. And I think that's what really made it difficult for someone like myself was actually I really had to play a different type of game than what I was accustomed to playing on grass or hard court. So um, there was a time, and my great partnership with Todd Woodbridge, the Woodies. Not only did I have success on the singles court, but the doubles. We really believed that we would win Roland Garros very early on in our partnership. We weren't afraid or frightened, or we didn't shy away from playing on clay, but it was a surface that probably diffused part of the strengths of our game. And we had to learn other ways of how to win and explore different ways of playing. But we went through a lot of heartbreak. We only picked up Roland Garros in men's doubles. I mean, as I think in your lead in there, I made the fourth round of singles. I was able to win the mixed doubles early on as well. But the men's doubles was the last piece of the crown of winning all of the majors for Todd and I. And it was only in that very last year of my career that we were able to pick up that wonderful victory, and something that we had longed for. I had longed for. I knew that Todd was going to continue playing for a number of years after I retired, so he would have more opportunities to capture that elusive Roland Garros. But was with great relief that we were able to do that in my final year of playing.
It seems like in the last few decades, there's a race in these stadiums to make them bigger, higher
Yeah.
quality, fancier. I mean, they're such iconic places. But how does Roland Garros stack up to the facilities like Melbourne Park or Wimbledon or Flushing Meadows for players and fans and their experience?
Yeah, look, I think it's fair to say over a number of decades, Roland Garros probably, along with the Australian Open, lingered behind, say, the Wimbledon. Of course, we've got the great tradition of Wimbledon, the historical factor there. The US Open, that they've been improving leaps and bounds. But I think for Australian Open, they probably, with prize money issues, they lingered behind the other three slams. But Roland Garros in general, probably the facilities were not up to par compared to the other three. It had the prestige, but again, it took a unique player to win Roland Garros. And I give a lot of credit to the French Federation. Over probably, I mean, I've had the luxury of commentating there for almost 15 to 20 years, and I've seen that tournament come on in leaps and bounds. They've improved the facilities. They invested in restructuring the court Philippe Chatrier, which is their centerpiece. Their secondary court has a roof now. We've seen the third court improve, but just the general facilities. And I think they've increased the acreage, just the ability for fans to come in. There are more options that probably they can find at the other three Grand Slams. Now they can, there's shade when we playing on bright Parisian days. They've got the facilities for the fans, but they also cater for the players. So for me, I mean, look, I've had great success at Wimbledon, obviously had success at the other slams as well. But as a commentator, Roland Garros is my favorite Grand Slam now.
You talk about the fans, and each of the Grand Slams kind of have characters in themselves when you talk about the patrons.
Yep.
How would you describe the fans in the stands at Roland Garros, and how are they different from, say, Wimbledon or Melbourne Park or in New York?
Yeah, well, I think for the probably to I guess term each of them, the Australian Open is commonly is like known as the happy slam. It's the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
Everyone's
Oh, yeah.
fresh and it's summer. Australians are on holidays, and a lot of kids are not at school because of school holidays, and so they flock to the courts, and probably are quite well versed as far as tennis knowledge. Paris, it's the fashion slam.
Yeah.
The crowds are passionate. And that's the aspect that I love about being there at Roland Garros. Probably didn't always enjoy it as a tennis player, but
Right.
as a commentator now, I mean, you go there, the fans, it's like the roof on Chatrier and Longlen, the two major courts. If there is a French player, or if
Yeah.
it's a really highly competitive singles match between two foreigners, the French, they get in there and they are there, and it's almost like they lift the roof off of both of those stadiums, and the roar of the crowd is probably unlike any of the. As I said, you've got the history of Wimbledon. You've got the circus-like atmosphere that is pertaining to the US Open, but I think that's what Roland Garros is the appeal for fans and for players these days. And of course, it doesn't help that the French Federation, they've got a number of male players at the moment that are just kind of knocking on the door. They may not end up
Right.
holding the trophy at the end of the 2 weeks, but they are there competing and probably will go deep into the second week.
Are there any current players that you've seen dramatically improve on that surface, the clay, over their career? And do you think there are any that could be a factor in 2025? Because let's be honest, the clay is what really sets it apart.
Yeah, look, as I said in the early part of the chat here, that it's a real test of many different areas. As a tennis player, you're tested in many areas, and it also provides that ability for you to build your game out, and I think to have a bit of a long-term approach to yourself as a tennis player. Um, I think it's, for instance, this year, you can't go past a couple of names that are standing out. I mean, we've seen the return of Jannik Sinner, and of course, Carlos Alcaraz winning on the weekend over Sinner's return. But they're probably the two standout players. But if you look at, for me, I was just looking at the draw and some of the rankings and the results over the past few weeks on clay. I think it provides an opportunity. It could be some real kind of say dark horses, and I've circled Lorenzo Musetti, an Italian who
Mm.
just for me is a delight to watch because he's got this incredible backhand slice, which is undervalued in men's tennis these days. He has the ability to come over the top. But I kind of guess I'm saying that he uses a variety of spin, and he can play on the baseline, but he's not shy about
Right.
coming forward. So he's really developed his game, and I think he could be a danger to some of the marquee names. But two other guys that I think really stand out for me because they have an offensive part of their game, which I think is also vital to someone who's going to go far in the tournament this year. But someone like a Jack Draper, a
Mhm.
British player who has I think over on the clay, it's probably not his preferred surface, but he has this big serve and he has a forehand and he's left-hander. And those three ingredients, he's we haven't seen him pick up a win in the lead up to Roland Garros, but he has moved inside to the top 10. And as I said, he has a game that could win points. And the other one, which is probably might have a few people scratching their head, but don't discount Jakub Mensik, a guy from Czechia who has really come on leaps and bounds this year, and he's not an alien on this surface, and that's what makes it difficult because he can win points very quickly.
Speaking of marquee names, Iga Swiatek obviously has won the last three tournaments, but she's not in the best form of her career right now. Is she still a favorite of the women's side for you?
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt. I mean, coming into it, being a three-time, previous champion at Roland Garros, but this year it's been spotty performance from her. And I look, great champions. I think we place expectations on great champions, and of course, those champions also expect so much of themselves. Um, I have a feeling that these results that we've seen over the um, past couple of months, it hasn't just been on the clay. I think it's been all year long. That maybe put a bit of a question mark over how Schwantek is traveling, but it has a way of actually inspiring her, inspurring great champions on to try and peak for those major tournaments. Of course, it's nice always to win the lead up tournaments, but great champions, why they're a part of history is because they focus on the biggest tournaments in any sport. And for us, it's the four Grand Slams. I think Schwantek is probably disappointed, no doubt disappointed with her performances so far, but she's going to be ready for Roland Garros 2025.
Talk about peaking at the right time. You think of the American Coco Gauff. Hasn't had a great 2025, but she did reach the final in Rome.
Yep.
How do you see her game on clay going into this year's event in Paris?
Yeah, look, I am. She. I think she's made the final of the last two 1,000 series tournaments in Rome, and I think it was Madrid. And it's probably a surface that is helpful in a way for Coco Gauff, because when she comes up against a Swiatek or a Aryna Sabalenka, who are two of the biggest hitters on the women's side, it provides Coco that opportunity to actually stay in the rally. She doesn't get really hit off the court. And it's a very rare thing for her ever to be hit off the court, because, she's a big hitter herself. But, she's got those assets. There is the serve, she goes through these spates of, double faults, and it's like her Achilles heel. And when that Achilles heel gets hurt, your confidence starts to waver. But she's been very solid in the lead up, and I think it's only fueling her belief that she could take out the title this year. So in a way, I think there's the women's side that actually could be, somewhat, a level above the men's as far as, who is going to win. I think it's very, quite open there on the women's side.
Before we switch over and talk a little Wimbledon and grass, what are Carlos Alcaraz's chances, do you think, to repeat this year?
Having won, not too long ago against Jannik Sinner in the final of Rome, I know that I was with some people over the weekend who have great knowledge in the sport itself. They've been past players and coaches of some of the great players. We were all sitting around thinking that Jannik Sinner, the final of Rome, that it was going to be his. And yet Alcaraz stepped up in a big way. And that first set, and of course it's a different format, isn't it? In the lead-up tournaments, playing a best of three. And that first set meant so much for Alcaraz's chance. And he went on to clear out in the second set. I think the 5-set format is very different, but I think Alcaraz is certainly fueled with the success on the weekend, and it's going to be either an injury or someone is just going to have to play an absolute brilliant match on the singles court if Alcaraz is not there at the finals end of Roland Garros this year.
Getting our tennis fix on this sporting planet with Olympic gold and silver medalist Mark Woodforde. Mark, tennis is such a character sport, and the ambience of the locations. You go from the down and dirty, rough and tumble, literally dirty Roland Garros with clay on your shoes and your treads, to the dainty all-white grass of Wimbledon. Wimbledon is just such an iconic venue of any sport. What makes Wimbledon so special for tennis players like yourself to go there and be there in their summertime and enjoy everything from the strawberries and cream to Henman Hill to everything else that is South London?
Well, yeah, where Wimbledon is as I said, there's historical side to Wimbledon, and I think there was, and I hope it remains the same. But if you just competed at Wimbledon, you'd kind of consider yourself that you've made it on the tour. And I know I felt like that. My aspiration was to get to Wimbledon, because as a young kid, sitting back in Australia, in Adelaide, where I'm from, and late at night in our winter, which is the British summer, but watching these great players compete on grass. And so for me to have played there and to have walked away with a number of trophies, I feel like I'm on top of the world. And even now, when I go back, it's like as soon as you get within a bit of a distance of Wimbledon, I feel like there's this shock of a jolt of that you're back. It's Wimbledon, but it is very different as well now compared to the time that I played. Grass was grass. The ball stayed nice, and well, I don't want to say nice, because it actually haunted a lot of players because the ball stayed low. You get some very dodgy, uncommon bounces. You have to be able to change your shot selection at the last minute because of those bounces. You also had to actually get used to the weather, because the British summer didn't necessarily mean that it was going to be sun shining every day. You had to deal with some of the rain delays. But these days,
Right.
Wimbledon is very different. The grass is the makeup of grass is a lot different, and the transition coming from clay onto the grass, There are times, Todd, that I look at players, and as I said, I commentate at Roland Garros, and I've seen these players play a particular style on clay. These days, when they move over onto the grass, the transition, I feel like I'm still seeing the same player play exactly the same way, because the grass allows them to actually stay on the baseline and play almost
Hmm.
identical brand of tennis as to what they've just played over on Roland Garros and the lead up to Roland Garros. So that's
Interesting.
been the change, the significant change for me, that over the last number of decades, is that players have the luxury now. They don't have to change their game too much because of the grass. It's actually stronger because they're hoping that their grass can
Yeah.
survive the whole summer. So the ball bounces up a lot higher, very similar to the clay, and they don't have to go in and serve and volley. They don't have to try and chip and get to net, charge the net, and play a lot of volleys. They can actually stay on the baseline and go with a style of tennis that they've just played for the last couple of months on clay.
And the folks at Wimbledon do a magnificent job caring for those courts. But you do, of any other Grand Slam, any other tournament, you are going to play a different surface from day one that you will if you make it to the championship, because you see the wear marks even after all that. You get to the end, and I remember as a little kid watching Wimbledon thinking, surely they could have got a clean grass court out there. What's going on here? It's just dirt on the baseline. They've worn it out. Is that hard to adjust to, that, if you make it to that final, that this is not going to be like day one?
Well, but you like me. I mean, there's some classic photos, aerial shots of
Yes.
Wimbledon at the start of the tournament. Beautifully lush
Yeah.
green turf, unmarked, and then you get to the end of the tournament, and look, during my time, you'd probably see the wear and tear around the service line, because you were
Right.
always serve and volleying. You were trying to get to net as often as possible. And I remember there were times, I mean, my first Wimbledon title came in 1993, and I played the mixed doubles final the day before the men's doubles final. And my partner was Martina Navratilova. And I remember
Wow.
walking out onto on the Friday for the final, and she walked out into the middle of the court, and she motioned for me to come over. So I was standing there, and she said, "Now just have a look." And I'm sure the All England Club probably don't appreciate me talking about it, but she, was pointing down to the cracks in the court, in the service box, that had arrived over the last 2 weeks from the constant play, the wear and tear. And she'd say, now, if you can serve and hit that particular mark, you're going to get this incredible bounce, and the chances increases of you winning the point. And she was going around and assessing, because she had all this
Wow.
experience from the years of her playing in her lengthy career,
Right.
that was vital for her. So it's just those small areas can make a big difference. And that's what I learned the following day when I went out and played the men's doubles final with Todd. And so I kind of felt like I was Martina. I was like, Todd, come over here, have a look at these little cracks on the court, because if we can hit those marks, we increase the chances of winning. But of course, now, as I mentioned earlier, the surface has changed. We don't see the wear
Mhm.
and tear too much around the service line. We see the wear and tear on the baseline. And you actually see the groundsmen do a magnificent job of overnight.
Right.
They patch up the court. They put in some fresh turf just to try and make it look good for people watching, whether they're there watching live or for a lot of us watching at home on TV. But it becomes a bit of a, dare I say, a bit of a dust bowl. It's not crater like, but it is a sort of an indentation around the baseline, because so much tennis these days, even on grass, is played on the baseline. So they're just the subtle differences that grass is how it's presented, and what the players have to contend with these days.
Woody, thanks so much for sharing that. That's the kind of insight on this sporting planet that we love. How else are you going to get a story like that from Martina Navratilova telling you where to look for? That is brilliant. Before I get you out and get your before I get your predictions, I do want to ask you a question that I get all the time, and I know you've got a ton of trophies and hardware. People always say, how do they get that home? Whether it's a surfing win at Bells Beach, whether it's a skiing event, whether it's Supercross,
Yep.
the trophies that you get, you are not checking that in your bag and carrying that on the plane as you head back home.
See, just behind me.
There you go. That's what I was alluding to. How does it all get? Does the tournament handle all that for you?
Yeah, most of them
Okay.
do. Certainly the majors. I think it's from the four majors, the four Grand Slams. They have they will send it back to your home address or an address where you'd like it to be sent to, and obviously the trophies when you're standing there on the podium or in front of the crowd being presented the trophy, it's quite sizable. So the four slams,
Right.
they actually what they send to you or what you receive, and you're able to put it up. And if you have a home office with some shelving like I do, um, it's about 1/3 the size of the original. So
Yeah.
my Wimbledon trophies, which I think is this one just here, that's one of the 7 Wimbledon
Yeah.
trophies that I won.
Beautiful.
It's about 1/3 the size. This one just here, this one that my finger is right underneath, that's the US
Hmm.
Open. That probably mirrors the same size that they actually do present to you. But a lot of the tournaments are good enough to actually send to your home address, except one, and that is the Davis Cup trophy. If you think of, and
Really?
I do have my Davis Cup trophy. It's pretty up. It's on the other side of the camera, unfortunately, but it
Okay.
is. I mean, I think the grandest trophy in men's tennis is the Davis Cup trophy. It is massive. Of course, it's been running for 100+ years, but they
Right.
give you a miniature version, and it is very difficult for them to they put it in a case, but it is very difficult for the ITF to actually to send to you. So
Right.
I remember when I was fortunate enough to win the Davis Cup with the Australian team and carried it home, but it was kind of on the plane having to travel from the south of France back to Australia. But I do remember a lot of the airline staff actually, and I was overweight with a lot of the baggage but they kind of
Yeah.
waved me through because it was almost like I could just show I've got the Davis Cup trophy, and they were like, "Okay, just go
Yeah.
through. You go on. That's no problem."
That's amazing. Well, let me get this from you because I can't let you go without getting your predictions. Who do you like on the men's side and the women's side for Wimbledon this summer?
For Wimbledon, wow. I'm going to go. It's not much of a limb. I'm going to go with Alcaraz simply, given his performances over the last couple of years, and as I said, he finds the transition to be less strenuous or less. There's less anxiety for him to actually, or
Hmm.
less trouble for him to transition from clay over to the grass. So and look, when you get on that winning run, I feel like you're a bit more of a Superman approach. So I'm going to go with Alcaraz for Wimbledon.
And then I'll do it in reverse. Who do you like for Roland Garros?
Yeah, look, I might go with my fellow ginger, which is Jannik Sinner. I often say that he's my son, and his coach is Darren Cahill, who I grew up with in Adelaide, and we have a
Yeah.
bit of a laugh. But I think my son has, look, he's very fresh, and obviously coming back from the suspension
Hmm.
for 3 months. He's been able to work on his game, work on his body, work on his mind, and I think he's going to be very, very hard to beat at Roland Garros.
So you've got Sinner winning Roland Garros on the men's side.
Yep.
You've got Alcaraz winning in Wimbledon on the men's side. Now let's go to the women's side. Let's start with Roland Garros. Who do you like on the women's side? Because the women's side seems a lot more wide open.
It does. I, I, I actually think the winner from last week, Jasmine Paolini, she's just a street fighter on the clay courts. This is the surface for her, and I think given the I think the pressures of winning at home, and there is nothing greater when you're playing a major tournament in front of your home crowd. And she was able to navigate her way through the draw last week and come up victorious. So, whilst Roland Garros is obviously it's a slam, so we're considering that the highest of level. I actually think because she's come through in Rome, she's going to be very, very difficult to beat when we get to Roland Garros.
And then finally, we'll get you out here on this one. Who do you like winning the women's title in Wimbledon this year?
I'm going to go with Aryna Sabalenka. Her game. I've mentioned probably a couple of times in the chat already. I feel like the players that win these major titles, they have to have some weapons. They have to have that ability to finish the points. It's not just a defense that sets them apart from the rest of the playing field, but is the offensive play. She hits the ball big from the baseline. That serve of hers, I think she's kind of tasted defeat a number of times at Wimbledon when she's probably been in the position of being one of the favorites. So I think sometimes when you reflect back, when you win, you win. When you lose, you learn. She's had a few losses that probably have really disappointed her, but I think she's going to be ready for this year's Wimbledon.
Mark Woodforde, you're an absolute legend, my friend. Stay cool in California this summer.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm fortunate that I am getting over to Paris. I'll be there in the second week, and I'm looking forward to getting back over to Wimbledon as well. So come and say hi to me.
Woody, thanks for joining us on This Sporting Planet. We always love your insight.
Thank you. Thanks, Todd.